We are now recording. And this is the University of Mount Olive in Mount Olive, North Carolina, the Tillman School of Business, where we are about to present a case prepared by a team of students in the MBA program who will provide a strategic assessment of General Motors. And with that, I'm going to turn the program over to the coordinator, Josiah Orr, who will introduce his teammates and get us started. Josiah?
Everyone, I'm Josiah, and my teammates are Shane, Christina, and Patrick. And we're just going to get started right away so that we can hopefully get through this whole thing.
Okay.
Next slide. So just something I want you, can we go back to that slide again? As we go through this presentation, the transition slides here, you can see this is an aerial view of New York. There are going to be pictures of significant roadways in different countries that are really important to GM's operations. So I'm just going to point those out for you as we go.
That is an amazing photograph. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, try to just take a quick look at, see if I can get this out of the way. Look at that picture. You're looking down from space on, is this New York City?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. A little bit of history.
Christina will start off with the history.
Okay, so I'm just going to cover the topics that are highlighted. Y'all feel free to read the rest of the bullets, but just to make this presentation a little shorter, I'm just going over the yellow highlighted bullets. So first, GM started with only the Buick Motor Company, and it later acquired other companies such as Cadillac, Oldsmobile, Chevrolet, and Pontiac. Oldsmobile actually was terminated in 2004. While Pontiac was terminated in 2009. The reasons they were terminated were they were not bringing enough profit to the company. So they just decided to stop the manufacturing of these. In 1920, they actually made an appearance abroad. So this was the first time they actually ventured off into other countries besides the United States. The countries included England, Germany, and Australia. Next, GM first introduced the V8 engine in 1955. They placed this within their Corvettes and the Bel Air, and this engine was just basically stronger and stuff like that. So that was something new in 1955. Also, they made several acquisitions along the way, Electric Data Systems and Hughes Aircraft being two of them. The Electric Data System, they used this to standardize the vehicle's computer systems. They acquired this for around $2.5 billion. And Hughes Aircraft Company was to improve GM's competitive position by embracing new technology. And it also wanted to diversify in non-automotive fields. And a fun fact about the Hughes Aircraft Company, when they were making a bid for this, they were actually competing against Ford and Boeing. And they were able to beat both of them with a acquisition of about $5 billion. So GM partnered with Saic, which is a major car company in China. They partnered with them in June of 1997. They first introduced a car into China in 1999. This was a major partnership for GM, as, like I said, Saic is a major car company in China. So also the current CEO is Mara T. Bera. She is the first female CEO of a major motor vehicle manufacturing. And also GM started selling cars in India. A lot of people might ask why, if India is a future growth market, but there's a time and place for everything, and India is just not the time currently. But I am more than sure that Ms. Bera will look into the future to go back into India. Also, in more recent news, February of this year, GM announced plans to pull out of Australia, New Zealand, and Thailand. The reason for this is they're also not making a lot of profit off of these in these countries, and Ms. Berra is going after quality, not quantity. So she wants countries that are going to produce revenues and profits for her.
That's let's see. Mrs. Berra has really changed the philosophy. This point is so important. You know, for years and years, we thought of GM as the largest American car company, and for quite a while, the largest in the world, but we just thought of GM as the biggest car company. And here comes Mary Berra, an engineer, looks at it and says, that doesn't make any sense. You know, we should be trying to be the most profitable car company. That's what our shareholders want. And when she looked at it from that perspective, she found that a whole lot of the markets that GM was in could not support profitability. And so GM began to withdraw from those countries, including India. And although it seems like perfect logic today, since the action's been taken, no one thought of it until she took her position as CEO. So really a remarkable change.
All right, so I'm going to get into some of the products and the brands that GM offers. There's 4 major American brands, being Chevrolet, GMC, Buick, and Cadillac. As you can see, there's 3 brands that they offer in China, Baojun, Jiafeng, and Wuling, and then Holden is manufactured in Australia. Next slide, please. Chevrolet is affordable and reliable for all customers. They have a diverse vehicle lineup ranging from small sedans to large pickup trucks. And Alfred Sloan, who is former CEO of GM, said that Chevrolet manufactures a car for every purse and purpose, meaning there's something for everyone and every consumer out there. Next, GMC. They make a variety of small, midsize, and full SUVs and pickup trucks. They have a big focus on quality, and it's known as to be as like a step up from Chevrolet as far as the products that they offer. Buick.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm having difficulty with my mouse, and I am sorry.
Okay, so Buick is known as affordable, modern luxury. Big thing about Buick is that it was GM's first presence in China, and they've been in China since pre-World War II. And one thing about them is they're very high up as far as with the high-level politicians, and so a lot of the government officials drive Buicks. Next is Cadillac, known as Precision, Innovation, and Performance. It's the highest luxury line offered by General Motors. Cadillac has been known to have a target market for old people. However, they're looking to rebrand that and reach the younger demographic. And then we get into their international brands. Holden is manufactured in Australia. And then they sell in Australia and New Zealand. As Christina mentioned, they're starting to pull out of Australia and New Zealand as they don't see it as a high market anymore. However, while they're still there, they manufacture vehicles similar to US under the same names, but they also manufacture vehicles that are unique to Australia. And then getting into China, Baojun, which is produced by SAIC, as Christina mentioned, is the newest brand in China, and they offer cheaper alternatives to Chevy and Buick, which is the other American GM brands that are available there. And one thing they're focusing on is compact vehicles, as you can see in the picture.
Okay. I went to GM's website last night. Actually, I went to Holden's website, and lo and behold, there is no more Holden. Holden has been discontinued by General Motors, if you go to the website, you find a notice that says that, I think they said with a great regret or sadly, something like that. But GM explains why there's no more Holden was produced in Australia and New Zealand, the two oceanic countries, but no longer. It's all done. So this is another of these illustrations where the product just could not support profitability based on volume. And so Holden is no more. It's been discontinued. And if you go to the note or to the website, it explains that GM will continue to service the cars and such, but they're all done with Holden.
Also in China, we have Wuling, which is also produced by SAIC. They provide a variety of specialty purpose vehicles. They do a lot, like in China, there's, as you can see in this picture, that would be a common taxi cab, or what they offer that. And then they offer affordable and reliable electric vehicles, which is a major market in China, and it's a growing market that GM is focusing on. And then Jiafeng, they have a complete lineup of light to heavy duty trucks. They also produce military vehicles in China, so they have a large presence within the government as well.
General Motors produces Chinese military vehicles, is that right?
Well, yes, under Jiafeng.
Okay.
So this is the mission. This is the stated mission that's propaganda on the website: to earn for life, to earn customers for life by building brands that inspire passion and loyalty through not only breakthrough technologies, but also by serving and improving communities in which we live and work around the world. That's the
Passion. Yeah.
Exactly, kind of capture people's attention. But for the Abel's model, we're looking at markets served. So GM tries to serve a lot of different types of markets. You've seen that through what Patrick just said about all the different brands and different types of vehicles that they have. They try and capture different levels of income with those different brands, and especially what they're looking at is China and the United States. And so some vehicle owner statistics just to kind of keep in the back of your head is the average American vehicle owner is 51, almost 52 years old, and between an income of 28,000 and 59,000. So basically, GM's kind of considering this within that range. Around there is where they're going to get a lot of target customers. But that's not to say that there's not also a market for the high-end luxury customers and then the low-end economy customers.
Well, the one thing that jumps off the screen at you is the average age of 52 years old. So the average GM owner is certainly, for by way of example, probably not a college student, right?
No, especially now that they've discontinued brands like Pontiac.
Sure.
So some unmet needs. GM satisfy the societal need for affordable, technologically advanced, fuel-efficient, environmentally sustainable, and safe vehicle. These are some needs that GM already meets, but the thing about these needs is there's always a greater need for the same thing. So people are always needing more fuel efficiency, more safety, more technology, and that's what GM's trying to do to be competitive in these markets. So some key points that we're looking at is artificial intelligence, electric vehicles. They want to create systems for uncongested roads, and that goes into a lot of their autonomous vehicles and their ventures with Lyft, whereby they're able to operate in cities. And when they have those kinds of systems, not as many people need to have vehicles, and then the cities don't need as much parking space, and there's less congestion. That's kind of GM's vision. They need to be able to create aesthetically appealing cars, and they need to be able to market to seniors, like we saw in the last slide, where that's
It's hard to imagine that GM can satisfy an unmet need for uncongested roads. That's kind of the role of the government. So I think that, you know, if this were done correctly, it wouldn't necessarily be for uncongested roads either, but rather some sort of a means of system for, see if I can get this thing to work for me. And there, boy, look at that delay. If you're going to have an artificial intelligence system that is steering or guiding a car without a driver, congested roads, which we all deal with, are for sure a problem. And you know, unless the self-driving system is working really well, you're going to have a bunch of fender benders, right? And so later on in this presentation, near the end, we're going to find out that GM has acquired a company that should enable it to design cars that solve that problem. So I hope you'll forgive me for taking the liberty of adjusting your slide, but maybe that's something GM can do. I'm sure it can't go out and provide all those roads for people. That would be a globally gigantic task.
Yeah, it's more about the technology. So competency is required. They need to be able to do large-scale manufacturing. They need to be able to invest a lot of capital and a lot of R&D. The automobile industry just never stops moving and advancing, so they need to be on top of that. They need to be able to produce hybrid and electric vehicles, especially for the Chinese market, which you're going to see a lot more about in the future of this presentation. Artificial intelligence is going to be very important. Consumer tastes, if they can understand what people want, especially in different markets, then they're going to be able to adapt their products and be able to sell to them. They need to be able to have a financing service. All of the big companies have financing services, and it just makes everything a lot more convenient for customers. They need to have strong political relations, especially in China, which can be very difficult, especially these days, as we'll go into later, but they are doing that fairly well. And they need to be able to market to the older generations.
Yeah, so the reason we've gone through this, of course, is that we started out with this notion of propaganda. And lots of companies publish their so-called missions that really aren't. But mission is an economic concept, and Abel has provided us with a structure for it. And basically, after we've gotten through served markets, these last two items is just exactly what does the market segment that we're serving want? What is it that still hasn't been provided that customers feel needs for? And most important of all, what kind of capabilities are required to accomplish that mission, to meet those needs? So this is a much more comprehensive perspective of what the company's in business to do. Another great view.
So this is a roadway in southern China, and you can just see how massive and expansive it is, even though it's in a fairly rural part of China, which is interesting and just gives you a little snapshot of just how big and how important China is going to be as an automobile consumer. So here we're looking at GM unit sales. You can see right off the top, right off the bat, you can see that China is the bigger consumer for GM than the United States, and that's the biggest takeaway that I want you guys to have from this slide, is China is the place for GM right now.
Yeah.
So GDP what we're looking at here is the most interesting thing is China's GDP is the highest GDP, and it's looking like it's going to continue to be the highest GDP into the future. We have countries like the United States, which does have a high GDP, but it's really quite a bit far behind China right now, and the trajectory isn't nearly as promising as the Chinese GDP. It's been flatter for a much longer time. The Chinese GDP is just continuing to go up. So that's going to be massively important as GM continues to consider which markets they should be in. And then also, India is going to be very important too, because we see them having a nice trajectory upwards with the GDP, even though it's not quite there.
If we were to extend that orange line into the future, and in fact, the source that these data came from forecast into 2024, but forecasts generally see this orange line as turning up, not quite like a J, but more than a gradual turn. So there will come a time, according to forecasts, when India's economy catches up with China's. And you can let your mind run crazy with that idea, but basically in the Eastern Hemisphere, you've got a majority of growth and activity economically with China, India, and the Southeast Asian nations. All of those are growing rapidly. And then you've got the mature markets, which are the yellow and the blue line here of the US and Europe, growing slowly. They're mature. They grow in lockstep, as you can see. But in terms of growth rate, nothing like what's going on in Asia.
So GDP PPP, what we see is a different story. This is the purchasing power parity. This is the GDP per capita. And this is how much, this is basically the ability of the people in the United States or any other country to buy a vehicle. This is how much each person has. So here we see the leader is clearly the United States. There's other countries that are close to that. They're smaller markets. They're countries like Canada, Sweden, those, but we're not looking at those right now. The United States has the wealthiest people. So when we're looking at that, that gives us a lot of indicators for the ability to market to people. You don't have to go all over the country and try to pick out every little person who can afford your vehicles. The odds are if you go and set up shop in a place, you're going to have a good kind of market there because there's going to be a lot of the people there, a big percentage of the people who can afford your vehicles. Here we see the country that we were looking at was China for the GDP growth overall. They're not quite where the US is at GDP per capita. So that's why the US is still a really important market for GM.
We do see that there's some kind of growth going on in China. You can see that it's just caught up with Mexico. Not that that's any great accomplishment, but there's this upward turn. We see also India all the way at the bottom. So India was exciting as a potential growth market, but in terms of consumption potential, it has a way to go. Most economic forecasters believe that, in fact, India's consumption potential will grow rapidly, but it has yet to demonstrate that.
Okay, so for the inflation rate, the U.S. has had a slight spike in 2008. This was followed by it had a slight spike, and then it went right back down, the inflation rate, and then it went back up. And ever since then, it's kind of been, it's been decreasing. However, it's been steadier the past couple years. As well as for Brazil, the inflation rate was very high and has slowly gone back down. And then again, in the recent years, it's also been very constant, very steady, and that goes for all the countries shown, including Mexico and India, which are less developed countries. So starting in around 2009, that's when inflation rates have been steadier. Inflation rate would affect GM's production, and also it would affect the customers' buying habits. So they would much rather wait until inflation rates are lower in order to go purchase cars. And it also affect GM's production as far as raw materials. They would go up in price with inflation rates going higher.
Yeah, one thing we have to remember about data like this, it's come from the International Monetary Fund, and it takes the IMF a while to put their data together. So the data for 2019 is an estimate, probably a pretty close one. 2018 is for real, that's the real thing. So when we look at it from that perspective, we can see that Brazil, hasn't been out of this rapid inflation very long. And we can see that Mexico's inflation rate pretty high. So these two countries would cause marketers in a company like General Motors to ask a question, and that is, if inflation is so high in these countries, and it's hard for people just to make their personal budgets provide for the clothing and food and shelter, healthcare perhaps, that they really need, is there enough left over to buy a new car? And for that reason, maybe the marketing priorities would be less aimed at a country like Mexico and Brazil, and more aimed at a country that doesn't have to deal with such high inflation.
All right, so this is the unemployment rate. The first thing you can really see that pops out is the unemployment rate for Brazil. It's still super high, and it has been before, and it's significantly higher than the rest of the countries. It's due to the instability of the currency and the government. It has changed the president. It has had 4 presidents in the past 5 years, so it is not stable. Their politics are just not there. And there's been several domestic problems like overspending that has caused this. Just the inflation rate is just out of control in Brazil. As you can see, the Goldman Sachs, it had a report, it predicted a 12.8% rise in US unemployment by the end of this quarter. This is due to the coronavirus, and this is here for the United States. As we can see, a lot of people have been unemployed, they have lost their jobs, whether it be permanently or temporarily. That has increased the employment rate currently right now. But the most significant thing was Brazil, how high it is, and that is the reason why they do have manufacturing plants there. However, they have tried to pull out. They did make the president of Brazil at the time made an agreement to keep them in Brazil to help with the unemployment rate, because he knows how high it is, and taking those manufacturing plants out of Brazil would just make it go higher. But they have tried to pull out of Brazil because it's not making any profit for them.
Right. And with unemployment like what we see on this chart, and the coronavirus now in South America, we can only imagine what unemployment is going to look like in Brazil as this thing unfolds. So for sure, Brazil, Argentina, regrettably Chile, which had been a growth industrial and a growing industrialized nation. But South American countries are just having a rough go these days, and probably are not attractive markets for American auto companies, even though those companies, as Christina says, are there. General Motors is certainly trying not to be there. Exchange rates? Who's got exchange rates? Oh, I'm sorry, saving rate.
Yeah, this is personal savings rate. Basically, personal savings rate as you can see, took an obvious and hard hit around 2009. That's just expected to happen with the recession. But we've seen an increase in personal savings since then, and that's been really good thing to see. That means that people have more money, they're able to make investments, they're able to make bigger purchases and stuff like that. But what we're going to see after 2020, personal savings rate is going to drop because of this coronavirus, and that's going to be a hard hit for these auto manufacturers.
Yeah. It'll drop, it'll go down as the unemployment rate goes up, right?
Yeah. So I'm going to try and breeze through these exchange rates really quick. Just here you can see the euro against the dollar. This is the only one that's flipped where the euro is actually stronger. But even so, we can see that the euro is weakening against the dollar. So the dollar is getting closer and closer. Now it's quite close. It's even less than 1.1 euros to the dollar.
Yeah. So this means that the euro in recent months has been less able to buy dollars. It takes a euro will buy fewer dollars, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you're probably going to explain it, but the other charts we see are going to be upside down. They're going to talk about how many dollars foreign currency can buy. I'm sorry, how many foreign currency units a dollar can buy.
Yes, exactly. So here we're looking at on the Mexican peso, for example. You can just see consistently it's rising. There's tiny little falls back down, but overall it's always rising against the dollar. And then you can see, especially recently, there's a spike here in 2020 for the Mexican peso.
So if I lived in Mexico and I wanted to buy an imported General Motors car, would it be more difficult for me today than it was a year ago, or easier?
Yes, it'd be much more
2
difficult.
years ago. Yeah. Okay, because it takes more pesos to buy a dollar.
Yeah.
Yeah. What does that mean for General Motors generally? They're obviously not going to be able to sell as many imported cars or exported cars into foreign countries. So how do they keep their sales up if people can't afford to buy them across the border to import?
This means that GM has to set up manufacturing plants in all of these countries where it is. The only one that they could potentially not do that for is Europe, but even so, they should probably set up manufacturing plants in.
Well, Europe's got the same. Europe has the same thing. The graph is just upside down, but we still see the euro is buying fewer dollars. So, if we're going to pay for an imported GM car with euros, we're not going to be able to get as many dollars with a euro, so it's going to take more euros. But your conclusion's absolutely right. And now we're back to Mary Barra, who says, I don't want to build plants in Brazil. So if people can't import them because the currency, the real, isn't worth as much, we're not going to spend billions of dollars to build plants where the economy is weak and people can't afford the cost of living. So we're just not going to do that.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what you'll see in these two here. So here we have the Indian rupee. That's also a very aggressive trend line there, where you see that the rupee, the US dollar, is able to buy more and more rupees, which would make it extremely difficult for anyone in India to be able to import GM vehicles if there wasn't a manufacturing plant there. And then also we see in China here a very volatile chart, and what that's showing us is the trade wars. And that's because China likes to have a weaker currency because they're an exporting country. So they're able to sell their stuff to other countries. Other countries are able to buy a lot of their stuff. So sometimes they'll intentionally just drop the value of their currency, and then the US hates that. So they get into this battle between them. and that's where you see it going up and down with China. So
Great.
that says for GM is it's very risky in China if you're going to try to import vehicles there, because you never know what's going to happen the next day. Maybe it just drops like a rock. Also, what this tells us is whenever they make money in those other countries, they want to convert it back to the safest currency as fast as possible, which is the US dollar. Especially in China, you can see just over the course of a couple of days, if their value can drop like that, they don't want to mess around. So they're probably converting it on almost as soon as it comes in.
Well said.
So this is basically, I've said most of this already. As we looked over before, China's the growth market of the present. India is going to be the growth market of the future, even though their GDP per capita is still pretty low. US has a large market, but they also have a high GDP per capita, and that's why they're still very important for auto manufacturers. For exchange rates, GM has to pay close attention to these exchange rates because they're really important when they're operating overseas for their strategies. Chinese exchange rates are especially important with how volatile they can be and with trade wars going on. And for personal savings, rising US personal savings demonstrates growing ability to buy a car. So this should have been a good thing for GM to see looking forward. But now with COVID-19, that's going to take a hit, but a lot of things will take a hit.
Well, we can hope that the government's right and we'll see a rapid recovery. Some of us are not quite as sanguine and don't expect the recovery to occur in the so-called V shape, but maybe an extended U.
Okay, so this is the consumer trend section. This is the gross national savings all the way up until 2022. As we can see, China and India have high savings for infrastructure, which is very good for GM. Like we said, that China is the growth market of the future. So this shows potential for them. Basically what this means is they have the ability, like I said, to increase their infrastructure. The creation of highways increases the need for vehicles. The more highways they produce, especially China, they'll be able to produce more vehicles. Vehicles will be more in demand, and the purchasing of GM vehicles will be higher in China due to the infrastructure they have. As we can also see, Mexico, United States, Brazil, they're all in the lower part, much lower than China. But it doesn't mean that it's going to stay that way. It would always have the potential to increase and also become leaders for GM.
I think you covered everything, Christina, but maybe for the folks who are listening to this, we can sort of make it a little clearer. First of all, this chart probably belongs up in economics. This is not personal. There's some personal in it, but gross national savings is the sum of corporate profits and personal saving. What's significant about gross national savings is that it's money in the bank. These are corporate profits that are after taxes. They're either on the balance sheet or in the bank, but they're pretty much unrestricted. That would be especially the case in a country such as China. Personal savings, of course, are unrestricted currency balances in banks. So what we've got is the sum of readily available capital that can be used to invest in the country and the country's infrastructure, such as highways. And that's why this is so important to General Motors, because these funds, in fact, in China are being used to build highways. You saw that neat picture that Josh showed us of a picture in China where the highways were just going into the country, into the interior. that's exactly what's happening. And of course, as the interior is developed and there are more highways, there's more demand for cars. There's more opportunity to drive cars further into the interior of China. So this is pretty important because China has the largest portion of its economy that is converted into so-called saving or gross national saving, this readily available funding. Be aware, however, that this is a proportion of GDP. These aren't actual dollars or currency units, but they give us that indication. And then, as Christina pointed out, what's kind of interesting is the gray line. We know about China, but here we see the second highest line is India, which suggests to us that India has the capability to develop that infrastructure. Thus, China is the growth market of the present, but given that India has the capital to extend its infrastructure, India well may be the growth market of the future. So this is a dynamite chart because it's got so many implications. You just have to be very clear in understanding what it represents. Okay. Sorry to take so much of your time.
Okay, so one of the raw materials for cars and that really affects cars and the purchasing of cars is gasoline. So this is the average price of gas per, in the US city. As you can see right now, currently in 2020, it's going down. And as we can go outside and see in gas stations, the price is falling. And this is largely due to the dispute between Russia and Saudi Arabia. This is not going to be something that's going to last forever, but it's something that is currently going on now, and it's going to take some time for gas prices to go up. How does this affect GM? Well, GM also, one of the markets is fuel efficient vehicles. So now that gas prices are going down, cars that use more gas, that have more horsepower, heavy duty features, all these features are more desirable. So now that gas prices are going down, people might be looking at purchasing these vehicles. So this might take an impact on fuel efficient vehicles. But like I said, this is only short term and the prices will gradually start going back up. The next is for aluminum, which is also a big part for cars. As we can see, it has been steadily dropping, and this can also be largely due to the slowing demand in China for it. Another thing that could also be imply this is the increasing exports of semi-fabricated aluminum that has put pressure on primary aluminum. This one is for iron and steel. So basically, you can see it has been decreasing for some time now, for the past year or two, with a peak in right before 2019. And this has been helping GM lower its costs. It's been helping lower their costs because obviously we need aluminum for the cars they're building. But as you can see, towards 2020, you can see it's there's a slight increase, and so future projections is it's going to increase.
Yeah, we'll probably see it fall back down and with what's going on generally in the economy. Incidentally, someone has some sound in the background. It sounds like it's a television, but whomever it is that has the TV on or other noise in the background, would you please mute your microphone? We are hearing what's going on in the background.
Okay, this is for vehicle manufacturing. As you can see, there's a lot of peaks and valleys. This could be due to seasonal pricings. There's definitely certain times of the year that people tend to get the cars more, and this is towards the end of the year. Manufacturers have been able to sell the cars relatively at the same price. If you would like to connect this to the previous slide with the steels, the PPI for motor vehicle manufacturing, if all else equal, will slow the PPI of vehicle manufacturing with decreasing steel prices. This allows for GM to increase their profit margins if aluminum and steel are going down while still kind of remaining same prices for the vehicles they're selling. It obviously creates a profit margin that comes very handy to GM. This is for motor vehicle parts and dealers. So obviously right now, especially specifically right now during the coronavirus, a lot of people aren't going out and buying cars. They're not upgrading. They're going to do maintenance on the cars they currently have. So in order to do maintenance, they're only going to buy car parts. So it's expected to increase sales of motor vehicle parts rather than going out and buying and purchasing a new vehicle. So this is the real disposable income. This is money left over after bills and taxes and everything. This is the money that people can use to buy items of their wishes. So due to the coronavirus, more people, the higher the disposable, the more likely people are to purchase vehicles. So we can expect a drop due to the coronavirus. Because a lot of the unemployment rate is going high. Also, they're not receiving an income. So they're going to be saving that money for bills, for shelter, for water, and all this stuff. And they're not going to be inclined to go and purchase a vehicle.
Sorry, I had myself muted. Okay, looking at the different types of debt here, what I really want us to take a look at is student loans and just how fast they've grown, and the fact that they are the biggest type of debt. They're substantially over auto loans, and then everything else is considerably far behind, given the growth metrics. And the takeaway from this is basically student loans is a huge factor of debt, and so many people have student loans. So this is going to make it really difficult for the young people to be able to buy vehicles while they're still young, because they're going to go through university, they're going to graduate, and then they're going to have all this student debt. So they're basically going to be looking for the cheapest vehicles, or they're going to be looking for ways not to use vehicles at all, using public transportation and different options such as that.
This is a dynamite chart with a dynamite conclusion.
Okay, so this is the age population. So as we can see, seniors is a big growth market. Also, another big growth market is the 25 to 44 year range for the ages. GM needs to take note of this and making vehicles more appealing to each one of these age groups. And also something else, another thing we have to take in consideration with this is the gaps of the years. So even though you see like under 5 is all the way down at the bottom, that's because it's only for 5 years. Whereas compared to like the 45 and 64-year-old like range, that's a 19-year difference. So you just do have to keep that in mind. But seniors is definitely a area where GM wants to market to, as well as the 25 and 44-year-olds.
Yeah, I just marked off a 5-year growth period here, a 5-year planning period. Sometimes these vertical lines can help. When we look at it that way, there's no question about it. The seniors, which are 65 years and older, you know, they have special requirements. I can tell you I'm a senior and I've got special requirements, and they're basically to keep me from cracking my car up. So safety features really matter. The insurance companies like it when we have those too, because then they don't have to pay for my crack-ups. The growth potential of the 25 to 44-year-old category, which is a large number of people, is a lot more gradual. But when we take into account the number of people in that category, as Christina says, we just can't neglect it. But one thing you have to be impressed by is that folks who are 25 to 44 are very recognizable for their characteristics. For instance, they have growing families. This is the age when you go from one kid in the family to 2 kids, when people are moving from a smaller home to a larger home further out in the suburbs, perhaps. When their income is high, but it's being consumed by all the stuff that kids require people to buy. Seniors, on the other hand, have a lot more discretionary spending power. They're much more inclined to buy that Cadillac, for instance. And again, the growth really is eye-catching here. But most importantly, we've got two very different market segments with very different needs. And this presents a problem to General Motors because if it offers features appealing to one group, they may be less appealing to the other group and so forth. And the way they solve that problem is by promoting different car models with different features and different advertising. Oops.
Okay, so I put this in here because this is for the US. However, if you want to go based off the previous slide where we said they have to emphasize on seniors, this one shows that in between the five top slides, GM has 3 of them, being Cadillac, Buick, and number 5, GMC. As you just said, seniors are more prone to buying Cadillac. Buick is also very popular in between the older population. And as we can also see, it shows the average of the sales they've had. And so Cadillac, the average person was about 47 years old. Buick was 45 years old, and GMC just in general is 42. This is purchases just through CarMax, which is one of the leading sellers of used cars here in the US. But I found it fascinating that GMC has three slots in the top 5 here in the US.
Boy, I'll say. Now, one of the things that we did not point out, I don't know whether I can capture this. I can. And that is Chevrolet.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So Chevy is General Motors' offer to the younger crowd, right? And what a difference there is in the ages from 39 to 47. That's about an 8-year age gap, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty substantial. 8 years as a proportion of an adult's lifetime. You know, we can begin to buy a car, let's say around 18 years old, and if we live to be 78, that's 60 years. So what portion is 8 years of that? It's a pretty significant portion. So this is a pretty substantial difference, and just identifies again how important it is to make these products respond to the different categories. Let's see, where is 38 in here? 38's up on that red line, isn't it? So we're going to be offering Chevrolets to that young group in the red line, and we're going to offer Cadillacs and Buicks to those old folks like me.
So if you notice in the previous slide, the youngest average age was 36. So that leaves a chunk of the population out of that. So what do they market to the younger folks? So this one also from CarMax shows that sports cars are very intriguing for the younger generation. So the market for sports cars for the older generation is pretty much non-existent. They don't really purchase them. So they need to keep this in mind when marketing like their Camaro, their Corvettes. They need to keep in mind that it's for the younger population, that the seniors probably won't like that. They'll probably go more for the Buick and like the Cadillac.
Yeah, but what happens at age 45?
It does go back up. That was something that was stated as well. That when you're super young, you're going to be more intrigued by it. And then once you start going around 45, you start getting more of an income. You might be prone to go back to a sports car just for luxury, more than for just like common use.
This is, let me help you here because I can kind of appreciate it a little better than you can. This is the desire for a second childhood you know, you know, the folks in the middle ages, 45. Okay, this is not a kid. 45 is somebody who's had a chance, maybe made it into the executive ranks, makes a little higher income, and just wants to feel like, you know, I've still got it, you know, a second youth, you know, a wishful thinking, as it were. And so, but this person's got bucks in their jeans, right? This guy here, over here, sticking his nose out of the car, he's a salesman. And when he sees this, yeah, okay, because this person here is not going to buy a cheap sports car, are they? They're buying a Maserati or a Jaguar, you know, a Lamborghini, or, you know, this is a this is not a cheap sports car. Over here, yeah, it's not an expensive sports car. It's sort of a little car. But when we go over here, these folks are putting out serious bucks for a second childhood, for rethinking their youth, right? But convincing themselves that they're still full of get up and go, you know. Probably if it's a guy, he's got his second or third wife in that car with him, you know, and, you know, Yahoo!
Okay, so this one is more about what they are looking for. So like you had mentioned earlier, you're looking more for safety. And this kind of divides the categories in between younger and older people. So like I said, as generations age, the taste also differs. So the younger generation is more intrigued by flashy and fuel-efficient vehicles, which you can see with the blue bars, while the older generation prefers safety. They both agreed on fuel-efficient vehicles, but safety was definitely more of a concern for the older generation. Do keep in mind this was for a small portion. It wasn't like a huge study. It was maybe, I believe it was less than 100 people, but this was just a general glimpse of what the age groups are looking for. Okay, so this one also wants to see what people are looking for, but this is more based off of the country. So the country had several options, but they picked only the top 3. So the most common safety feature was reliability in between all the countries. China US had a 97% reliability, 75% of them chose safety, and 69 said fuel economy and good mileage was important. Those were the top 3 for USA. For China, they picked the top one as safety with a 72%, reliability for 69, and fuel economy for 60. But most of all the countries picked reliability and safety as their top 1 and 2. There's also other categories like running costs and the quality of the actual car. Will it hold up? Will you have to constantly do maintenance on it? Stuff like that.
Christina, we cannot read the green where it says 65 or the yellow where it says 61. Can you tell us what these 2 categories are?
Yes. The 65 is the fuel efficiency, so it's like good mileage, being able to get the most out of your buck for gas. And the yellow is the running cost. So just
what?
The running cost, low running cost.
Okay. Operating cost.
Yes.
Okay. I don't think that what this chart is, what makes this chart interesting is the individual numbers. I think that what makes the chart interesting, first of all, is the relative consistency. As we see, there's a whole lot of attention to reliability and safety. When you get those 2 out of the way, you've covered most of the things. But the other thing then that is interesting is the occasional difference. So here in Russia, for instance, quality of workmanship sort of creeps into the picture. In Japan, did you say this is the operating cost? So It's unusual that we see that come in at such a high level. And the other one, you say the green one is what? Good mileage.
Mhm.
So the folks in Japan must be looking at their car from a very economical efficiency standpoint, as opposed to others that are more interested, apparently, or the majority tend to be interested in safety, which is, I think, what reliability also refers to. So you get a fairly consistent global pattern with some fairly interesting country differences every once in a while. And Japan and Russia just stood out to me. Maybe you guys can see another one that pops out to you.
The USA has the fun and enjoyable as one of the higher ones, don't they? Oh no, that's not. I thought that was great.
It's the Netherlands.
The significance here, again, will be for the the design engineers, right? The style. You know, what is it that the engineers want to put into the cars to make them most appealing in different countries? We see a lot of uniformity and an occasional exception, which the design engineers need to take into consideration.
So this chart basically shows, well, first, we're obviously moving into a time frame where a lot of technology is being put in different things and much as cars. And so a big market is self-driving cars. That kind of shows by country if they want full self-driving cars or not really. Do you want them just a couple features here and there, or how would they like their cars? So as you can see, the country that wanted the most just basic automation where we have full control of driving was the USA. And as far as fully self-driving cars, USA isn't very interested with this survey. The one that stood out the most was India. India was high for all the categories from basic to fully self-driving. And once again, we can also compare this to India being the future growth market. And that shows a lot of potential in the future. Japan had like a steady decline where most of their interest was in basic automation, while self-driving wasn't really something they cared for as well, much like Germany, which was at an all-time low for full self-driving.
Yeah, the people who drive Mercedes-Benz, Audi, the German cars tend to appreciate that transmission, the experience they have from shifting gears and so forth. So I guess that's very believable. But what is particularly attention grabbing is China and India, and you don't really need to look very long at this chart before you see both of those lines up at the top. So folks in these countries with the very large populations where that gross national savings, where those lines are so high, where the building out of infrastructure and building of roadways is faster than in other parts of the world, the folks apparently in those countries are simply interested in new cars and what a new car can do for them, and the most advanced car. You know, for many of those people, a car isn't something that they're going to buy another one of, just like they've bought a half a dozen before. It's a whole new thing. And for them, the whole new thing needs to be whole new. They want the most modern, most most autonomous vehicle. Whether they can get it is another issue, but I imagine that the people in the who do design work and General Motors and Toyota, Ford, they look at this graph and ask themselves lots of questions about features that need to go into cars that can be sold successfully in those countries. And apparently, the more automation, the more attractive a car is in those developing nations. This is very, very interesting. What you do about it is another question. Whoops.
Okay, so this is starting to go into like the safety concerns that consumers have. And once again, this is for self-driving cars because when I was doing my research, a lot of it was about self-driving cars. So the top 3 concerns are wouldn't feel safe. They want to be in control at all times. So fully self-driving cars isn't something that this population is looking for. And also, they don't want the car to make mistakes. They don't want it to take a right turn when it was supposed to take a left and they went across 3 or 4 lanes. So they want to remain in control. And I feel like the first 3 go hand in hand, just wanting to be in control, not wanting the car to mess up, because once again, it's a self-driving car. So it's fully on its own, it has programming, and it has all these tests that had to go through a bunch of tests in order to be out in the dealership, but yet people are afraid of this technology because perhaps like the other ones, they don't know enough about it. Also places like India, where there's a lot of people, a lot of population, there's a lot of traffic as well. So self-driving cars can conflict with that. If the system messes up, it could potentially kill somebody. If they run someone over, they could run into different infrastructures of building or not stop at a red light or a stop sign. So self-driving cars have a lot of concerns for people. Some other safety concerns people had, the operation of motor vehicles requires a high safety level. GM has added features over the years to satisfy the safety concerns consumers have. Some of the features consumers wanted to see were availability to see in blind spots, automatic emergency braking, cameras, and lane departure. So now for like lane departure, for instance, GM heard the people and they have added like slight vibrations in the steering wheel, cameras. They have rear view mirror cameras as well as like side for some cars. So when you're going to turn right or left, it actually pops up on the screen where your radio or stereo would be at. It pops up an image so you can see the blind spots as well. Also in the side view mirrors, there's also like little lights that will pop up just to make sure that you know that there's a car in your blind spot next to you. And it's just a conclusion. So as I mentioned earlier, the increase in motor vehicle parts are going to go up since people aren't going to go out and buy vehicles. High presence of older generation perhaps needs to be better marketing for the younger generation. A lot of consumers are hesitant about fully self-driving cars. Gas prices decreasing, fuel efficient cars will be negatively impacted. This is short term as gas prices will be going up in the future. India with a high growth savings shows high potential for future business. As we have mentioned before, India is the growth market of the future. India has a good market for self-driving cars in the future. They continue to have a heavy market for seniors, so they're really trying to appeal to the seniors since there's a really big group. And decrease in disposable income currently because of the coronavirus. They're not, like I said, they're not going to go out and buy vehicles. They're going to save it more for non-discretionary items.
Great. Market analysis.
This is just a snapshot from 2008. So it shows many existing markets or markets that they've now, GM has now since exited. And you'll see in the next slide the comparison from 2008 until now that you can go.
So you saw before they had a bigger presence in India, bigger in Brazil. And here we see again that it's China and the United States that are the 2 big ones, and they don't have a presence in India or Europe anymore. So industry leaders, GM, as Professor Roney just said, they used to be the top in the world. They were called a clay giant though, because they had a lot of market share, but they weren't extremely profitable. Now GM is not even in the top 5. Here we have Toyota, Volkswagen, Daimler, which is Mercedes, Ford, and Honda. GM is close behind though with a revenue of 145 billion, whereas Honda is there at 147. So in the last 2 years, 2017, 18, and now coming into 2019, this is the first period of decline in the automotive industry in global sales. And a big contributing factor to that is US-China trade wars, as well as some other things, but that's the biggest one because those are the two biggest markets for the automotive industry. And as you're going to see in the oncoming slides, both of those markets have been taking a hit and decline because they just keep on imposing regulations on each other. Things get more expensive. Manufacturers can't produce as well in those countries, and dealerships are closing down. All that kind of stuff is happening. But
the portion of decline attributable to China is really eye-catching on this chart, isn't it?
Yeah, especially since they've had so much of the incline in past years.
Right.
So here we see where GM's decline has been coming. We saw before that they're not even in the top 5. The reason for that is moving out of all of these unprofitable countries. So their revenue has just been dropping, moving out of India, moving out of Europe. We saw before that Mary Barra came in around 2014. She didn't just immediately exit from all these countries. It took a couple years, but here around 2017 is when all of these exits started happening. And you see how much the revenue drops from about 16 up there to just under 11. And that's pretty substantial.
It sure is. I'm just doing a little edit there. Okay.
Here we see the market share in the US market for GM. What I want to point out is just the consistency over the years. They've been producing pretty much the same amount of vehicles generally since 2014, and they've had a pretty solid market share. It doesn't waver very much, maybe 1% over all of these years.
Let me just do a quick edit here if I can to make the point that we've got a narrow channel here. But if I can, my cursor has an attitude, and there we are. So what we see, whoops, what we're trying to see this thing really has an attitude today. I'll try to do it this way and see if it'll, nope. I think that may have got it. So yeah, so my cursor's given me difficulty, but we see production at a fairly stable level through all this time. And it's seasonal because these are quarterly data, but not a lot of variation, especially if I got my lines lined up correctly. But the market shares are coming down. And so this just reveals something somewhat important, and that is that GM's stable production, stable sales does not keep up with trends in the US market. And for that reason, we see a fairly substantial reduction in market share from about 18% down to maybe 16%, depending on which numbers you choose to compare. But part of this, obviously, is GM's decision not to make unprofitable cars. But I think also it reflects GM's lack of decisions to make more profitable cars, to make more cars which meet its profit requirements. So this stability, if it lasts long enough, will continue to contribute to an eroding market share. That's not good for GM in the long run.
One thing that I'd point out for this one that is not especially clear because it ends here on the second quarter of 2019.
Yeah.
Usually peaks come in on the fourth quarter. So I think you would see it come up to a bit more of a peak there. So
okay, fair enough.
And then here, this will kind of reinforce that point. You see way back in 1961, GM had almost half the market share in the United States with 46%. And now here they're at 17%. So they're still leading. They've led the entire time. There hasn't been a period where they haven't been leading, but now they're just barely leading the industry there. One thing that's interesting though, is you see where all that market share is going when all of these foreign manufacturers start coming in. You see Toyota and Honda and some of these others that just come in and they explode right up into these top 5 categories here. So that's where it's coming from. The foreign manufacturers are just coming in, taking a whole bunch of market share. So here we see the global car sales for the automotive industry by region. And the specific ones that I want to point out to you here are the giants, China and the United States, both of which had decline in auto sales. They're the biggest one in North America. It's 20 million. In China, it's 28 million. But remember, North America is a continent. China is just a country. But if you look here down at the United States, it's 17. So it's even less. And China has by far suffered the biggest losses here. They've had a 2.8% decrease. That's trade wars. That's what's happening to this whole industry. That's why the industry is going down. It's these two big giants here. But one thing that you can look down here at is in the Asian Pacific, India has 3.9 million, which is substantial. There's not a lot of other places that you can see here that touch that. I think that's the third highest. And they have a 9% growth rate, which is very substantial. Another interesting one is Thailand that has 1 million and it has a 20% growth rate. That's very interesting considering that GM just got out. They just pulled out. So that's an interesting trends to look at.
For sure.
So here we're looking at the growth rates. You've seen this before. It's India and China population growth rates. We see how in the future here, the Indian population is just going to explode past China. And you see why when you see the population pyramid. India has so many more young people. They're having more children. So that population is just going to keep getting older. Healthcare is getting better. They're going to survive longer. Whereas China's population is in that middle age period right now. They're going to grow up and they're going to start dying, and then they're not having nearly as many children. That's why it's so much smaller there at the bottom. So that's why we're going to see in the future India.
This is you changed this slide in the last 24 hours. I think this age distribution diagram really makes this slide a lot more powerful. And we can see so much from it when we put these two countries next to each other. One of the things that strikes me is how much larger the older age group in China is, and how much smaller it is in India. That's because of healthcare, of course, and life expectancy. And then, as you point out, the much smaller, lower birth rates and how many years this now extends to. So as these bars move their way up to the top, it's going to make for a smaller car market and a much bigger one in India. And again, I would imagine that the folks in the auto companies are looking at this and wondering exactly how they should respond.
Yeah. So here we have the same thing we were looking at before, but this is for the Chinese market. You see that, again, they've had consistent sales in the Chinese market until recently, until kind of after 2017 Q4 there into 2018, 2019. They haven't been getting those peaks that they've expected in the past, and their sales have been lower than they've been since even before in 2014. And this is, again, the trade wars. That's what's happening here. That's why it's so difficult. The entire automotive industry in China is faltering. And specifically, I think it's especially hard for the American automotive producers. So, yeah, so you can really clearly see that in their market share as well, which is falling. That's showing you that even though the Chinese industry is falling as a whole, GM is falling harder than other producers.
Yeah. Well, that didn't work very well, did it? Anyway, the difference between this and the other chart like it is that in this case, the market share declines because sales decline. It's not because sales have remained flat. It's because, as Josiah points out, something is causing sales to go down, and it's this tension between China and the US for sure.
So here we're looking at the big winners in the global automotive industry by category and by model. So we see here, these are the different categories: the SUVs, compacts, multi-purpose vehicles, luxury. You can see all of those down there. You can see which maker has the model that's doing the most successful in that category. And then you can see the trend of that model. So the interesting thing is, in the biggest categories, GM only has one model that's up there, and that's one of their multi-purpose vehicle models in China. And even that model has taken a dramatic hit of a decline of 13% over these days. They have the S-Class in the luxury category, and that's been doing well, but that's an extremely tiny market compared to these other ones. And what we want to look at here is we want to look at the RAV4, which is produced by Toyota actually, and that has been able to actually dominate this huge SUV market, which is really interesting, and GM can probably look at some of the things they're doing with that and the kind of consumers that they've been able to successfully target with that RAV4, and probably learn something about that going into the future.
Okay.
So this is looking at what's happening in China in recent years. This is just showing us how the Chinese market has stalled, and this is, again, because of the trade wars and all of that. You can see just the incredible growth that they've experienced in the past, and how it's interesting how it just fell so abruptly. And what this tells me is that the economy left alone doesn't want to fall like that. It wants to keep growing, but the that growth has been halted recently, but that's just because of an external happenstance, which is the trade wars. But left to its own, I think the economy, you're still going to see that nice growth, even though it might not continue to be as exaggerated as it's been in the past. That's what I would expect. And here is showing us a similar thing, just how over the more recent years, it's just really been dropping off here, especially after 2017. The peak comes back up in 2018, but not nearly as high as before. And then it really takes a hit here in 2019 for the Chinese light vehicle deliveries. So here we're looking at the electric market. This market is really interesting because it's going to be extremely important for China, which is a very important market for us in general. And this is the plug-in electric vehicles. That's what PEV means. And we see going up to 2016 there's just been that rapid increase, and that increase has continued over the following years.
Josiah, if you can get a little closer to your microphone, every once in a while, frankly, regularly, your voice breaks up. We are able to understand what you see, but I think it's on about 80% of what you're saying. There's a little breakup going on. I imagine that there's a way for us to hear you just a little more clearly. Okay.
I'll try that.
That's better.
So what we want to notice here is the growth rate is very high, but the market is still very small relative to the rest of the automobile market. So here we see the difference between the electric vehicle market in China and the United States. You can just see how much bigger it is in China. That's going to be really important. China has issues with their pollution, and they're really pushing for these electric vehicles. So if GM's able to satisfy that, they're going to have the upper hand in the Chinese market. Specifically, what I want to point out is the battery electric vehicles. The plug-in and hybrid electric vehicles are actually somewhat similar between China and the United States, but the battery electric vehicles are what China just wants astronomically more than Americans. So GM's going to have that in consideration moving forward as well.
And right now, who's the new hound in the Chinese market?
For
Tesla.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They have a plant.
Tesla's built this monster plant. I may be incorrect about this, but I feel like Tesla has said that it's capable of something like 500,000 cars a year. I may not be right about that, but you may even have a picture of it in these slides. But if not, I've seen one, and it's monstrous. It's just a huge plant. It's in Shanghai.
Here, this is a projection into the future. This is 20 years into the future, and you see how small the electric vehicle market is right now, but you see just how much bigger it's going to be. It's going to grow a lot in the next 20 years, and a lot of that, especially in the next 5-10 years, a lot of that is going to be attributed to China. But then once we get into 20 years into the future, it's going to start evening out. Other countries are going to be catching up. That's what we're expecting. So I think we can basically skip this. I've basically concluded all the points on. So future markets, one thing that I've been looking at is every time we look at India as the growth market of the future, I think about what happens next and what similar markets are there. And I can't help but think about the African economies. I grew up in Uganda for 5 years before going to university. And basically what I've just seen is an incredible amount of development in these African economies. And a lot of countries just don't want to get their hands into Africa yet, which is understandable. But I'm going to show you a few things that makes me think that Africa is going to be really important for the automotive industry, especially long into the future. So what I think is whoever wins in India is going to win in Africa as well, because there's a lot of similarities. And if you can develop a strategy that's going to work for India, you're going to see similar growth in Africa. But I think it's going to happen about 20 years later than it happens in India. Here are some population growth examples. And what I've done is I've taken a sample of some of the East African countries and their population growth. And then I've shown what India's population growth rate is currently, what it was in the year 2000, and what it was in the year 1980. And what I'm going to show you is how this kind of corresponds to their GDP growth and how it's similar to Africa's GDP growth as well, but in prior time for India. So look at how some of these growth rates are kind of between 1.5% to 3%. This is kind of similar to how India was in 2000 to 1980, that kind of period where just before the growth really started taking off. So if you want to go to the next slide. So this is GDP PPP in India, and then I've compared it with a sample of African countries. I've taken most East African countries, and then I've added South Africa and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I've added these countries because the culmination of all of these countries adds up to the same size of the population as India was in 1980. So we are looking at a kind of similar size of economy population-wise, but we see the trend here that India had between 1980 and 2000 looks similar to the trend that Africa's had in between 2000 and 2020. So when that starts picking up and taking off, I think that's gonna start happening as well for Africa. So what I think this is really important for GM is when they're looking at entering these new markets and becoming a winner in India, I don't think that just means becoming a winner in India. I think whatever they figure out to do in India, by the time they've got that working, it's going to take some time. It's going to take about 20 years anyways to have a really good hold on that market. But by then there's going to be another emerging market, which is going to be in Africa. And if they're able to take a lot of those similar strategies, similar products that they've done in India and implement them in Africa, they're just going to have an incredible market that they could potentially take advantage of there.
This is very thought-provoking, brand new thoughts, but really interesting stuff. Quick clarification. Is the red line a forecast? Did
No.
you tell us that this is the forecast for the way East Africa's population will be in the future, or are these also 1980 to 2020?
This is the GDP, and this is 1980 to 2020.
Okay, so these are both actuals and I don't know whose forecast, IMF?
Yes, this is IMF.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, and basically if you cut out that chunk between 2000 and 2020 and pasted it over 1980, you'd see a really similar thing happening there. So that's why I said it in the future.
This is very provocative thinking. Thank you for this.
All right, so this is the 10-year Treasury Note. This is the rate that it's at. So as we can see, in between 2018 and 2019, it was at an all-time high. And since then, it has been decreasing. Basically, what this means is how expensive it is for GM to acquire a plant. And if they want to introduce themselves into new markets, this is very important. And I believe they need to take advantage of the low rates that are happening currently in order to introduce themselves into, like I said, other markets. Like Josiah said, Africa is a big potential for them right after India. But yes, this is basically says how expensive it is for GM to acquire a new plant, new manufacturing plant.
Right, okay.
So this is the short-term auto loans. As you can see, the shorter the term, the lower the interest rate. This is due to less risk associated with it. Just for the due to there being less time for consumers to default on the payments. This is beneficial for GM because if the interest rate is low, they're more prone to buy vehicles. There's also, as you can see, 60-month and 72-month loans. The reason why consumers would want to get these is because they're lower monthly payments. However, in the long run, they would end up spending a little bit more. And a fun fact that I found during my research with this is that 42% of the auto loans funded in 2017 were a term of 6 years or more. This is an increase from 29 with only 26% being 6 years or more. So what that basically tells us is that several years back, long-term loans weren't really a thing. They weren't very popular. And now they are. They're becoming very popular, and they've grown in popularity between people.
Hello? Is everybody's microphone?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is showing the different, where the vehicles in the US are coming from in 2017 here. We see that for US produced vehicles, only a little bit more of half of the vehicles in the US are US produced. The other almost half are imported. And only half or a little over half of the ones that are US produced are produced by US firms. So this is interesting because it's just showing us how important for the US auto market all of these imports and foreign companies are. Like we saw in the old slides how GM used to have almost half of the US market. And now we see that almost half of the US market is imports, and even of the US produced, almost half of that is foreign firms operating in the US like Toyota. So that's just something to keep in mind for just how the market is changing inside the US.
I think this is a dramatic chart.
So here we see some of the different American producers, and we see how much of them other vehicles are produced inside the United States and how much of them are imported. So we see that the top two are kind of Ford and GM. They are producing a lot of vehicles inside the United States, but Ford is actually producing substantially more than GM inside the United States. And what that tells me is that when we get into all of these trade wars and whatnot, GM is more vulnerable because the more you do across borders, the more difficult that becomes. So that's just something that they should be aware of and try and figure out strategies to mitigate that.
Good point.
So here's the industry lifestyle and what I've done, or life cycle, and what I've done is taken a couple different important countries in the industry, and then I've also put the electric vehicle auto market to show you where that is in the curve. So GM is operating in a lot of different places in this life cycle. They're operating in the US, which is a mature market. The auto industry in general is reaching a maturity, and the Chinese market is in the growth stage. I'd especially say that these days it's getting into the shakeout phase. Even though that shakeout phase may be induced by these trade wars, it's still meaning that the unprofitable ones are starting to take a hit and starting to have to be taken out of the industry. Electric vehicles are just getting onto this growth stage you saw before the charts on just how it's starting to take off in that J shape. And India is very much in the introduction phase, but once they get into the growth phase, they're going to be very important. So here's our cable.
Here we are in India.
Yeah, so this is a picture of India, just a really interesting passageway where they have to ship a lot of goods there.
Where they had what?
Where they have to ship a lot of cargo.
Oh, yeah. I would love to. There it is. Oh, we still have more. Now look what I did. But it's just a fascinating picture because of the trucks all lined up on this passage. It must take forever to make it through that passage and arrive at your destination.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get this back to white. There we go. Okay. So financial.
And so here we can see Ford or GM compared to 4 other industry leaders in the metrics: revenue, operating margin, return on total capital, return on equity, and leverage ratio. You can go to the next slide.
Okay.
Here we see revenues. Revenue peaked in 2016 and has been relatively stable from 2010 to 2019. There hasn't been a lot of growth. There's been a slight dip between 17 and 18, but other than that, it's been relatively stable.
What accounts, you talk about the slight dip, we're going from 165 billion to 145 billion. That's $20 billion of sales decline. That's a hell of a slight dip. What's the explanation for this slight dip?
So in between this time period is when General Motors was pulling out of unprofitable markets, so their revenues would drop when they left those markets.
Which markets?
India, some of South America.
Europe, England.
And Europe, yeah, or Europe.
Yeah, that's probably where the most of it was.
Operating margin peaked in 2016 along with revenue and saw a large spike after 2014. Oh, you can move on.
What do you think accounts for the decline in margins since then?
I think it would be, well, operating margin measures how much profit a company makes on a dollar of sales.
This may be due to pricing pressures.
That could be a reason,
saw
yes.
in Christina's charts that the cost of aluminum and steel had come down. So it's not due to higher costs. Presumably, based on those market share charts we saw, there's market pressure, and we would have to assume that the markets are more difficult to deal in, and that may be especially the case in markets outside the U.S. as well as within, but this is probably a pricing issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's also because they moved out of those unprofitable markets.
Right.
And those were really dragging their profit margins before.
Yeah, the costs of moving out would have affected the operating margin.
Here we see return on total capital. The drop from 2011, 2013, and just overall trend of lowering is due to the unused assets in the exited markets that we discussed earlier. So they have plants and equipment there that they haven't found a use for yet in most. I'm sure they're looking to sell or get rid of these assets. In other markets like India, they might be saving them for when they eventually want to re-enter the market. Return on equity has fluctuated between 15 and 28% over the last 2 years. We can see this rise between 2013 and 2017 because of the increase in net income they've seen. The leverage increased at a great scale between 2012 and 2017. This figure demonstrates the financial risk that GM is taking on. But if you look at the graph, it says that there's more debt for projects. They're levering up so they can start technologically advancing and looking for other things. Like in the next slide, it explains. If you could head over to that. GM is taking on a lot of financial risk to create a more sustainable future for their firm, including clean energy, as well as working on the Chevy Bolt and Chevy Volt, which are electrical vehicles, plug-in vehicles, hybrids, and other things that the market is asking for. Some of the findings. We talked about this, so you can go to the next slide. This is the compared market trends. This is just Toyota, GM, and Ford all combined. Toyota displays market dominance while GM and Ford battle between each other in revenue.
Rather interesting that Toyota sales are going up while the others are not.
Yeah. Operating margin for GM, it rose above their competitors after 2015.
And this is Mrs. Barra's change in priorities for strategy, right? Rather than being biggest, we want to be most profitable, and by golly, she did it.
Focusing on those profitable areas. Return on total capital varies between the leaders. For the most part, GM is the leader in capital productivity from this graph, recently updated 2019. For return on equity, Toyota maintains a similar rate over the last 10 years, while Ford, you can see after 2017, has a drastic drop, and GM rises consistently from 2010 to 2019 with some variances. Leverage ratio, Toyota is so significantly lower than the other two. It kind of shows that US firms are not able to be strategically aggressive when they're this highly levered. They have a lot of debt, so they're not able to move as easily as Toyota is into opportunities. Compared, we see that Toyota is the leader, GM is following, and Ford is very far behind. This just comparing the three companies' financial statements raises a lot of questions about who's going to take advantage in which ways in India, and is anyone going to try to, or other companies are trying to compete with GM in China, because that is where GM makes the most of their revenue. And next we have Porter's Five Forces. Competitive rivalry is very high.
Why are we interested in Porter's Five Forces?
Because it uses, or it finds the profit potential of the industry.
There we go. If we're talking about profitability back here, what is it in the industry that can alter profitability going forward?
Because the competitive rivalry is so high, there's many different household names. Everyone grows up hearing about Toyota, Ford, GM. So when they're operating at this very, very competitive atmosphere, they have to be competing in every single aspect of their products, including safety, quality, design, etc. And this makes the rivalry become very fierce. You go to the next slide. The threat of new entrants is relatively low. There's an immense amount of capital would have to be allocated to buying and leasing property that would create manufacturing plants. The industry is already established and mature, and there are a lot of regulations based on emissions that are very tough for people or companies entering the market to meet, such as the California Air Resources Board. They set that regulation just for California, but car companies aren't going to tailor their cars just for one state, so it generally became the entire regulation for the country. The threat of substitutes is relatively low as well. In some areas of the world, it's feasible to use alternative transportation methods like public transportation, but a lot of non-urban spaces require automobiles to get around. There's a small possibility that very advanced countries / companies could create rivaling ease of use transportation methods, and rideshare opportunities are still there. But a lot of these car manufacturers are also invested in those ride shares. So,
of course, in India, we know that there are substitutes in the form of two-wheelers and three-wheelers. I've spent a fair amount of time in what you would call Central Europe, Czechoslovakia, for instance, or the Czech Republic now. And quite remarkable, but believe it or not, people use public transportation, the trams. They go all over the place, and that's what people use to get around. They don't. There are cars, but more often people use trams.
The bargaining power of consumers is moderately high. A lot of there's certain types of companies that order fleet orders from car manufacturers, and they have the ability to bargain for prices because they're ordering such a large quantity of vehicles. Also, consumers can be quick to switch from brand names in different companies if their price range isn't met by a certain company, because buying a car is such a big investment for people. They usually don't they're not going to settle for something or pay out of range if they can't afford it.
Yeah. Want to be careful to make sure that we remember that GM's customer, its first customer is that dealer.
Mm-hmm.
And the folks you're talking about here, I think, are the dealer's customers.
Okay. The bargaining power of suppliers is low. There's many different suppliers of every material used. Auto manufacturers have the ability to change suppliers with ease. Suppliers are forced to change operations to fit the needs of the manufacturers. The graphic on the right, the one on top, just shows that there's a lot of different companies for certain car manufacturers to pick. And in the bottom right, it's a projection of a generic supplier for the auto manufacturers and how that they have to change in order to meet the needs of the ever-changing market of the auto industry for the manufacturers.
Oh, okay.
And then this is just a summary of what we went over on top in a visual form.
Okay, so the driving force behind profit potential in this industry is?
Competitive rivalry.
Yeah. And buyer power probably.
Mm-hmm.
And so what does this imply with regard to priorities for strategy?
I think that auto manufacturers really have to make sure that they're looking at what their competitors are doing, setting benchmarks, and seeing that they are releasing products that can stay on top of their competitors. Because if they fall behind in any category like safety, design, then consumers can switch pretty quickly.
Yeah, and with rivalry this intense, you kind of left with the position of having to have both differentiation to make your car attractive, you know, depending to whichever category of consumers, you know, whether they're the young folks or the old folks, the folks who want to buy a more expensive car or a less expensive one. You've got to have things for a product for, if you're General Motors, for every one of those categories. And certainly when you're in the upper category, you still have to make the car affordable. So it's differentiation and low cost. It's a hybrid strategy that GM requires, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Critical success factor report card.
So here are the critical success factors waged against the two industry leaders, which are Toyota and Volkswagen. These industry leaders are both leaders in market share, but they're also very successful companies given their financials, as you've seen for Toyota in the last slide. The big takeaway here is that GM's leverage is just very substantially worse than the others, and they're not able to be as nearly as competitive and aggressive with such low leverage. For things like AI capabilities, it's really too soon to tell who's actually got the upper hand for any of these producers. Here we see the most efficient producers are Toyota. They're just able to produce vehicles incredibly efficiently and quickly. And understanding consumer taste is going to be a really important thing, and that's something that all of these companies have been able to do in different ways with varying degrees of success. Toyota and Volkswagen have probably been more successful in the foreign markets, whereas GM really understands their American market and has been able to cater to those consumer tastes especially well. But we still see in their GPA, which is out of a 4-point scale, they're just not at the same level as these other companies. So for the BCG matrix, what we're doing is we're looking at a lot of the models and brands of GM and where they are in that BCG matrix. And some important ones here are Cadillac, which is their cash cow, Chevy, which is their star, also Buick. Those companies are doing good in either America or China, or both. And then we've got these question marks, which include the EV Bolt and Volt, Cruise AV Tech. These are all of their technological advances and their big moves in the automated or electric vehicle markets. And if you want to see why they're in any place, any given place in that Bcg matrix, you can look at the industry growth rate for example, the Hummer, which is a dog, or Chevrolet, which has a +9 growth rate, and that's why it earns the place as a star. So GM is most profitable when they're releasing new products. So this just tells us that product development is very important for GM. What you see here between 2011 and 2016 is just a steady increase in just how much of their revenue is coming from those new releases. But then it just continues to jump after 2017 through 2020, and that's going to be really important. That's their forecast. They're forecasting also that so much of their revenue is going to come from trucks, SUVs, and crossovers. A lot more of that new release revenue than there used to be in the past. So GM, again, just seeing that revenue from the new releases, they have to stay on top of releasing new vehicles.
This is a really important point for those of you out there in cyberspace who may be getting a little groggy because this presentation has gone on for 2 hours now. But what Josiah's pointed out is that something happens when GM develops new cars. And it's sort of an energizing of the entire product line, and the entire product line benefits from that. And that's probably simply because consumers are attracted more to the showroom, and in that showroom, they may buy a car that isn't recently introduced. But when GM introduces a new model, things get more exciting.
So here I've created a BCG matrix, except I've done the different industries in different countries for GM to just be mindful of. So the USA, for example, would be a bit more of a cash cow. They've been consistent, they make good money, and they're profitable in the US, but that allows them to enter into other markets and take advantage of other markets, such as their star, which is China. China's just had that great amount of growth, that huge potential for them. But then looking forward, what they want to do is put themselves into a position where they're able to get into those ventures that could be stars, such as India. That's definitely a potential venture in the future that could become a really big star in the automobile manufacturing industry. Also, I show Brazil there, that's a dog currently because of their political condition. And then Africa, which has the potential definitely to come up to the venture category into the future. So while GM is kind of in the US, China, star cow era there, and they've gotten out of a lot of the dogs such as Brazil and Europe, they've also got to be prepared to get into those new venture type industries.
Now, what would be helpful, but my cursor is it's not in control, and I took too much time the last time when I tried to use it. But if I could, I would make the China circle and the USA circle, they're about the same size, we know that, but I'd make them bigger, and somehow I'd make the India circle smaller, and certainly Brazil and Africa smaller still. Just to point out that we've got this big cash cow, which is adequate to supply capital for growth in China and capital for growth in India. So all in all, it's a pretty well-balanced portfolio. We would like to see more going on in India. And in fact, if we weren't looking at this geographically, we would see the Volt and the Bolt and some other things going on in ventures. So GM's portfolio is fairly well balanced.
So strength, presence in China, they're really focusing on profitability, which is really huge for them right now and important. And they're doing good at AI and electric vehicles. They're kind of with the other leaders in the industry there. And their SAIC relationship in China is a huge strength for GM. Weaknesses, incredibly high leverage. That's making it really difficult for them to be aggressive. They don't have any presence in India yet, which could be really important in the future, while Ford's holding on there, and that could give them an advantage in the future market there. And they're highly vulnerable in trade wars. So goals hierarchy. GM in general, they need to be pursuing superior financial results, specifically in their leverage needs to be better, and they need to be able to continue to have to be especially profitable in those profitable markets. GM in China and USA is able to continue to pursue more favorable market position because those markets are really important to them right now, and that's kind of pivotal for their success. We can go past this.
I think we've had conclusions too. Look, we've got a little problem. It's 20 minutes before 2. There may be a couple people that are listening that are in this class that are also in the 2 o'clock class. So essentially we've got 20 minutes here, which means we've got to really pick up the pace, because I think you guys have something like, 50 more slides. So somehow we're going to have to go through them at a faster pace. So wherever it's possible to summarize rather than linger on individual slides, that's what we need to do.
Yeah, we can go quickly through this. This is just projected over from 2020 to 2024. You go next slide.
Okay.
Projected revenues are projected to increase steadily. Yeah, yeah.
They all get better.
Yep. ROIC levels out.
Hangs down there because we're going to make an investment, as I recall. Mm-hmm. Return on equity has to come down just because it's hard to keep it up at such a high rate. But this leverage is of interest. What's the logic behind that one?
They're starting to pay off some of their debt, and once they get down to 50%, which they're projected to in 2024, then they can become more strategically aggressive. They're able to maneuver a little bit better into new markets and to compete with Toyota a little bit more.
Right.
And that's the same thing.
So here we are. Which is this? This is Brazil, huh?
Yeah.
Josiah. Josiah's the guy who chose these photographs, and boy, he chose them well.
All right, so getting into strategy, their generic strategy is a hybrid combining least cost and differentiation. Least cost, they're using robotics, automation to drive down labor costs, and they're also offshoring. They've moved some production to Mexico. Differentiation, bringing out new products. Obviously, the electric vehicles such as the Volt and the Bolt, autonomous vehicles, which they're using their Cruise automation company to do. Safety features, as we talked about, are very big. And then the variety of product offerings, what's needed in the United States is different from China, and that.
Right.
Worldwide strategy objectives, as you can see in green, these are the markets that they're looking to grow. So North America, China for sure. South America is interesting because as they've scaled back some of it right now, they still believe that it's a growth market for the future, and they haven't fully pulled out because they're thinking about reinvesting once everything politically calms down there.
I think that one of the real takeaways from this chart, Patrick, is how similar the market shares are geographically. GM's been around for a long time, has large investments in each of these regions. And so, in China, it's 15%, in North America, it's 16%, in South America, it's 16%. So GM is certainly a global player, and it has accomplished similar results market share-wise in each region.
Yep, and then we're getting into Ansof's growth matrix, which we use to determine past growth or intended future growth within the organization. Next slide. So we start with market penetration. They're looking at aggressive marketing, trying to target younger customers, and they have a big presence on social media. It's one of their highest spending areas actually within the company. So they're heavy on advertisements, heavy on commercials. You know, if anyone watches TV, you always see GM commercials offering their products. And then brand loyalty, they're doing everything they can to keep GM customers. Market development, the big one is SAIC. Getting into China was huge for them. Obviously, they're in Brazil, but slowly coming out. Europe, they were there, pulled out. Same with Australia. India is a market presence that they're hoping in for the future. They were there, they've left, but they're hoping to go back. Product development, as we mentioned, the electric vehicles are huge. Hybrid options, and then lower emissions. And then autonomous vehicles with cruise, as we've mentioned, and then vehicles specific to the region. Obviously, cheaper alternatives in China, that's what the Chinese market is looking for. China doesn't need the same 18-wheelers or heavy-duty trucks like in the United States. So those, and then compact vehicles in Europe and Australia while they were there, as the roads and stuff are tighter, they're smaller.
We saw GM's debt going up in the future, and it's to develop these new products, right? And that's the way this industry has functioned for many years.
Right. Product proliferation. They have some experimental acquisitions with Lyft and Maven. I'll get into them in a little bit. GM Defense. They make heavy duty military vehicles and other. They've made train engines. Big thing is their fuel options that they've gotten into a flex fuel technology. They actually made some systems for the Apollo missions, but the big thing is China. How in China they're making new products for low-cost alternatives, a lot of smaller and compact vehicles, and really there's no need for some of the large-scale vehicles that we have here because families aren't as big. You know, they're not traveling with 8 people when they go places, stuff like that.
Okay.
So this is just some of the autonomous assets. We can go through this really quick, but just a lot of the things that they've been getting into in the past years have been things that have been going towards autonomous AI technology.
Right, and I think without intending, you've given us a slide that could be called related diversification. This GM has made investments to enhance its products that are autonomously are autonomous, I guess you should say, or electric. So we have the Bolt, which I guess is the plug-in, and the Volt, which is the entirely electric car. Cruise automation is a business that was acquired that has software that enables cars to be self-driving. This was a major step in GM's strategy toward autonomous cars. Conceivably, those cars will be tried out with a company like Maven or Lyft. If we're going to have a self-driving car, we don't want to run into other cars. And so Strobe provides GM with the ability to do this sensing on the road. So these are all related diversifications which are intended to move General Motors forward in product development. And you can almost stretch this to product proliferation, you know, new products for new markets. But I think you can't quite get that far. I think this is all product development. Maven and Lyft are probably in product proliferation going into shared and immediate on-demand transportation.
Okay, so vertical integration.
Sorry I interrupted on that, but everything I just said is on the test.
They purchased GM Financial through AmeriCredit. It offers some dealer financing. A big one is a joint venture with Toyota that was called Numi. It allowed GM to learn lean manufacturing firsthand, and it focused a lot on being as efficient as possible. And it gave them full control over their production in that plant. Strobe, as was mentioned, develops laser-based sensors for those autonomous vehicles. And a big thing with that is it allows them to have mass production without reliance on suppliers. So everything is made in-house, produced by GM, as opposed to, you know, a competitor like Tesla who may outsource for some of their sensors and stuff.
Right.
Horizontal integration, some early acquisitions such as Buick, Chevy, or Cadillac, GMC. And then a big one was, as we've mentioned before, is their joint venture with Saic. It's the same industry, different location. They have access to the largest growing market, which is China. And another big thing is their government relations. You know, because China's unique government, not everyone is in that industry, in that area. So if GM has good relations there, they can profit well. Here's just a list of some major acquisitions over the years. You can see that.
And the ones that remain, and of course, over on the right side, Holden is no longer on that list.
Just some diversification, other areas. They own AC Delco, make automotive parts. GM Defense, they produce military products and defense industry needs. As Cruise Automation, as we've mentioned, they're really testing and developing that autonomous vehicle technology. That's the major part here. And then Motors Holding allows investment capital for independent GM dealers. So if someone wanted to open up a dealership, that allows them to have some financing there to sell GM products.
So here's just their portfolio of a bunch of different little ventures that they've been getting into. And this is just to give you a taste of how much of this is catered towards the zero emissions, the autonomous, and the electric types of ventures.
So GM is sort of a venture capital firm. Every once in a while, the venture capital produces a unicorn, a winner. And of course, that's why they do it.
Yeah.
Here's just a conclusion. I covered most of this. I think the biggest ones are their aggressive entrance into the electric vehicle market, as they see is that such a large area. And then, as Josiah mentioned earlier, actions to move into India or Africa as those markets will continue to grow.
Right. So here we are, Josiah.
British Columbia. Yeah, that's the view I have out my window right now.
Okay.
So SAIC, as we mentioned, produces their own brands, but they also produce for General Motors. It's the joint venture. The interesting thing is that they also have a joint venture with Volkswagen, which makes GM have to focus on their relations, because at any point SAIC could end their venture and focus only on Volkswagen. However, once they entered China, it doubled vehicle production in the early 2000s. And it led to their insertion in China with Buick, Chevy, and Cadillac, as well as the Chinese brands that we've talked about that they manufacture as well.
It's been a frustrating success. Frustrating, why? Because Volkswagen is also produced by SAIC, and GM and Volkswagen have about the same market shares in China. Frustrating.
Numi, as we mentioned before, was just
right. We talked about it before. Yeah. So OnStar.
OnStar's, it's a subsidiary of General Motors. They offer vehicle security, emergency services, diagnostics. So they also do, you know, turn-by-turn navigation, crash response, stolen vehicle tracking, all that just extra stuff that comes along with a vehicle that people are that find attractive when they're like shopping for new vehicles, and it's available in all their brands around the world. Maven is known as the Airbnb for cars. So also, I don't know if you're familiar with, you know, Lime scooters or Bird scooters, stuff like that. There'll be cars there, and you can rent them. You operate them. They're in 20 major cities, and the big thing is it saves on parking spaces. So the idea is to carpool. You use it while you need it there, but you have your options of getting around, and it allows for less vehicles on the road. And then Lyft, as we mentioned, is the ride sharing service. GM owns 9% of the company. However, they haven't done a lot with Lyft right now. They just own part of it. It's more of a what they're going to do in the future. The big thing is self-driving taxi cabs that they feel like will take out some of the drivers for Lyft, but they also could use that for their automation. And then this kind of just shows the green are the areas they want growth, such as South America, obviously China, North America, and then the yellow is what they want to maintain. So their North American car sales and other international markets. The blue is the big one, is what they see as their new options, such as electric vehicles with the Bolt, autonomous vehicles, as you can see, and then TaaS, which is transportation as a service, which falls into the Maven or the Lyft and those type of deals. And then the black just shows what they've got out of, such as India, Europe, Australia now, with Holden being gone.
That's an interesting chart, and I didn't compliment you on it before, and I should have, but you did a great job, even though you didn't get rid of the click to get out here. So I don't know, with my shaky, there, I got it out. Okay. So recent action.
Yep, and this just shows what they've done. It's kind of all of the implementation. The biggest ones, as we've mentioned recently, are getting out of Australia and New Zealand with Holden no longer manufacturing. And then they're focusing on their profitable markets, such as the United States and China, to really boost their income.
Okay. And the last slide, I believe.
All right, so this is Mary Bera. This is the CEO of GM. She's the one that has implemented a lot of stuff since her introduction in 2014. First female CEO of an automobile manufacturer. She's made crucial decisions, as in like the 30 million cars a recall of 30 million cars that she had in her first year due to a malfunction in an ignition switch. She has pulled out of multiple countries, which a lot of people turned heads to and thought it wouldn't work. She has won customers' trust by revamping the company's culture and the management process. And she has been ranked #1 in the Forbes most powerful woman in 2016. So she definitely is a female leader, someone that people can look up to and see that she has really grown General Motors, and she is a woman, which a lot of people don't think that in an industry where there's a lot of men that she would be able to do it.
This lady has made a lot of good decisions. And I think one of the things aside that makes her recognizable, aside from the fact that she's female, too bad that has to be a recognizable fact as an exception to the rule, but aside from that, she's an engineer. She's been part of this product design, and she understands the product and understands why a product is easy or difficult to manufacture. She knows the product better than the other executives, and she was a correct person for the board to appoint to the chairmanship, and we know that that's true because of GM's results. She's changed the strategy, and her changes worked. Okay, we're going to stop this. I'm going to stop the recording.